This video will be debriefing the task Curveball. Curveball works with quadratic equations and solving them by completing the square. All right, so we have the height in feet after x seconds is negative 16x squared plus 32x plus 5. We're trying to figure out when will the ball have a height that equals 7 feet. So first off, we're going to write a little equation here that talks about height. Now this comes from exactly what we're given in the problem. We have negative 16x squared plus 32x plus 5 equals the height. And we can even go one step further right now already to make the claim that that height is 7 feet. Okay? Now, in order to solve a quadratic equation, it must equal what? Hopefully you said 0. Okay? So, we have that 7 here. Now we can already see that we're starting to do that step here. We want to subtract 7 on both sides. That will give us 0 on the right side and then a little negative 2 on the left. Now, this negative 16x squared, we don't like that negative 16. That makes it a bit harder to work with. So we want to get rid of that negative 16, and how can we do that? Hopefully, you said something on the lines of dividing by negative 16. Okay? So when we divide every single term by negative 16, it's going to simplify down to this equation right here. X squared minus 2x plus 1/8 equals 0. Now, you might be saying, I don't like having fractions in my equations, Mr. Herman, and that's perfectly fine. However, this is going to make it a lot more simple compared to having this negative 16 out here. Okay, so in this case, having a little fraction over here, it's not going to be too bad. Okay, so we're fine working with this fraction. We'll see in a minute why we're okay with that. Okay, so now we want to complete the square. Okay, we're going to complete the square here. We're taking a step back into things we've done in the past few weeks. So we have our blank method here. Now show our B and C work down here as well. Okay, so notice how B is negative 2. Okay, C is B over 2 squared. Negative 2 divided by 2 squared gives us a positive 1. So we'll add 1 here, and we will then subtract 1 out here. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and simplify this like we've done with completing the square the whole semester. If you're still confused on completing the square and how we get to this point, I would strongly recommend watching the video rewriting into vertex form. So when we rewrite into a vertex form, we get something that looks like this. So there's our perfect square binomial, x minus 1, the quantity squared. If we recall, that is x plus b over 2 squared. Okay, that's where that comes from. That's how we got it. And then rather than simplify it already, I decided just to rewrite this one as 8 over 8. Okay, so we know 8 divided by 8, so it gives us 1. But now we have a common denominator. That common denominator will be helpful in a minute when we go about trying to solve this equation. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our next step here. So there's the equation that we had on the previous page. And let's take a look at what we want to do here. We'll go ahead and combine. Okay, so we said 1/8 minus 8/8 will give us negative 7/8. Okay, so not too much work with that fraction. Let's go ahead and see what we want to do next. No, we're equal 0, so we're good to go. But now we just got a square root problem. Okay, nothing more than just that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and add 7/8 to both sides. And we're going to get to x minus 1 squared equals 7/8. Okay, so the inverse operation of squaring is going to be the square root. We actually have to take on the left and take on the right. Now we have to be careful here. When we take the square root of 7/8, what are we going to get? So hopefully you mentioned something about having a positive and a negative. Okay, we have to keep that in mind. We have to have both of those answers. Okay, and then I made a mistake earlier by trying to say, oh, this is still going to be squared, but it is just x minus 1. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and solve this. So we'll add 1 to both sides. And actually, I want to solve this a bit differently. I want to take this x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 7/8 and break this down into 2 equations. Okay, I think it might be easier to understand if we break it down into 2 separate equations. Okay, so we have x minus 1 equals positive 7/8, positive square root of 7/8, x minus 1 equals negative square root of 7/8. So we go ahead and solve those 2 equations. And we have x equals 1 plus square root of 7/8, x equals 1 minus square root 7/8. Okay, I'm going to show that for you. Now, if we put that in the calculator, we're going to get x to be approximately, let's see, I think it's going to be 1.93. Yeah, 1.94. Make sure you label that with seconds. And then our other equation will give us 0.06 seconds. Okay, so those are our 2 answers. Now we have to talk about, are those reasonable? Do those make sense? Okay, does it make sense to have those as numbers here? So let's go ahead and take a look at what our parabola might look like. Okay, here's our parabola. There's our x-axis and y-axis. So let's say that this right here, we've got 7 feet. 7 feet. So our positive 0.06 could be right here. 0.06. And then our positive 0.1 or 1.94 could be right here. They're both at 7 feet. And they're both positive times. So both of those make sense. So when that ball is thrown, it will hit 7 feet at 0.06. It's going to come up and come back down and hit 7 feet at 1.94 as well. So both of these are reasonable answers.